Hello and welcome everybody to the next session in track 1. Here we are joined today to talk about identity security. Femi here is going to have a discussion with us, present some information. If you can all give him a warm welcome with applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Femi. I want to start by saying thank you to the BSides Edmonton crew. Thanks for having me. Thanks for some awesome swag as well. I think this is pretty snazzy, don't you think? I think this is pretty snazzy. So Christmas lights early for everyone. So today I want to talk about something. It's not going to be too technical, so I'm not going to ask you to write code or anything like that. So don't worry, it's fine. I'm not going to display or demo any shiny new stuff like Kim and Amit did. Although I think it's interesting that the BSides crew put together a bunch of identity-related talks back to back to back. So I think that's pretty nice because I think identity is the future of security. No, I don't think I know. It is. So, and because we are in a post-secondary school right now, we're going to start with a pop quiz. So ask yourselves and answer the question, who was the biggest driver of digital transformation at your company? Was it the CEO, the CIO, the CTO, or COVID-19? Almost everyone agrees it was COVID. COVID was a big factor in making many companies decide when either go cloud or change the way we do things or all of that. And today, thanks to COVID, we've got smarter threat actors, and now you can't use traditional castle wall defenses. So your firewall is no longer your perimeter. Now identity is the new perimeter. And so where are we now? First, there was a study in 2022. There was an all-out study that found that about 62% of workers between 22 and 65 say they work remotely, at least occasionally, maybe twice a week, hybrid, except, of course, you work for Amazon. Then you have to go back to work in January. No remote. And of course, that has actually led to many people being distracted. I know lots of people who say, if you want to give me a job offer and it's not remote, I'm not taking it. That's where we are right now. So there's an increased adoption of remote work from everywhere. So your hotel lobby is your office, the airport lounge is your office, and Starbucks or Tim Hortons is also your office now, as long as you buy a coffee and unlimited refills. So that's interesting as well. So there's been an increase in cyber threats that are targeting those human vulnerabilities because we're everywhere now. So that's the question, how robust is your identity management, right? So let's try and understand what that human factor is, because identity security really matters because attackers usually target user credentials to bypass defenses, breach systems, and all of that. So protecting the who in your security strategy is essential to prevent that unauthorized access and data theft. Also, in today's remote and hybrid environment, managing identity security has become increasingly complex. How many people have an IGA where you work? You see? Well, okay, one person, how many people have an IAM framework that they work with? Again, only very few people. So that's why it's so complex, not because they don't want to, but because it's just so hard to do. Because you've got dispersed teams. So ensuring that only the right people have the right access at the right time is a constant challenge. And it requires robust solutions, continuous monitoring, and not many enterprises have that resource. And finally, you find out that people are often the weakest link in cybersecurity. They can also be your strongest link. They could be your strongest in terms of defense. So people could be falling for phishing attacks or practicing good cyber hygiene. They swing all the entire length of the spectrum, very good or very bad. And human behavior sort of plays a pivotal role in securing those systems. So if enterprises can build security-first cultures, it empowers their employees to become your first line of defense. So that's what we want to look at. How can you do that as an enterprise? So today, because we know ESM is a nightmare for many enterprises, like I saw in this room right here, because there's so many things to do with, there's so many things you want to pull together. So let's look at some of what those challenges are. So one of those challenges that we have unsecure remote networks, because remote working introduces new risk and new complications. Many employees rely on personal Wi-Fi connections that may lack strong security, strong security measures. Everyone loves free Wi-Fi. So airport, hotel, lobby, Starbucks 2, the real Starbucks Wi-Fi. You know what I mean? So that leaves people vulnerable to systems vulnerable to attack as well. And some of these employees actually have accounts that have elevated privileges. So if this account gets taken over, for example, by an APT or a malicious actor, then it can have devastating consequences for them. Also, we've got personal devices because these days, some people, yes, some companies provide, but many people do work with their personal devices. And because you don't have strict device management, sometimes you have people using BYOD or you have people using COPE because they use devices for both for work and personal purposes. Sometimes it's not the same level of patching or the antivirus is not up to date, or there's an increased risk of malware infections on those devices as well. And of course, that means that there's a limited control over those endpoints because IT teams would face difficulties ensuring that how much sure that every laptop meets that standard we want, because we don't have access to every single laptop at every time. So it makes it a bit more challenging to monitor, update, and protect those endpoints effectively because you can't control the human identity that's at the end with that endpoint, particularly when you have privileged identities as well. And finally, there just is an increased threat landscape because being remote opens up a lot more entry points for attackers to actually exploit. And that makes it harder to manage and secure corporate data. So addressing these challenges is critical to actually safeguarding sensitive information that enterprises have and maintaining operational security, especially now that we're all remote, right? And of course, again, there is the psychology of cybersecurity as well, because human behavior is sort of the biggest thing. We've got cognitive biases and everyday habits that can actually undermine, the way, even the strongest security measures, because someone receives a suspicious email, especially when the email is from a purported Nigerian prince offering you a lot of money that is more than your RRSP has saved in 10 years, just to send him an email. So I'm like, hey, why not? It's $5 million. Who doesn't want money, right? So those human tendencies create gaps that attackers are able to exploit. So if you're able to recognize these behaviors, then we can actually train against those behaviors. So that's the first thing. Of course, there's also social engineering tactics because attackers don't actually target systems, well, not directly anymore. They target the people. So phishing, pretexting, social engineering, like we said, like Kim mentioned also in her previous talk just before, if you were in this room, they exploit human psychology to gain unauthorized access. Craft an email, he was at a conference and someone said, hey, you at a conference, so approve this leave. That's how those things work. And even, a cleverly crafted email or a convincing phone call or video call, like she explained, can actually bypass even sophisticated technical defenses. And these days, the malicious actors aren't just targeting individuals, they are targeting those who have assigned privileged accounts. And if those accounts are taken over, then it gives them an opportunity to sort of roam free through your environment unchecked. And finally, one of the strongest risks to actually mitigating social engineering and all of that is education. Continuous employee training is essential to help teams recognize and respond to those threats. Phishing simulations, awareness programs, education, and all of that helps your team actually spot those attacks before they actually succeed in attacking them. Because how many of us have phishing training or that kind of awareness training where we work? Okay, that's a better ratio, so that's good. Companies are beginning to wake up that. If you don't, maybe you should talk to your IT or your CISO or CIO, I don't know, whoever's in charge. So another thing is, it's actually quite hard to build a culture of identity security, especially at the enterprise level, because there's so many challenges. First, there's the role of leadership, because leadership sets the tone for that security. If your leaders don't champion secure practices or lead by example and make security a priority across the organization, then it becomes a challenge. I was talking to someone earlier today and was like, yes, leadership wants everyone to be secure and use MFA except them. So yes, MFA is for everyone except me, but that's where the biggest risks are usually. So it's not only MFA or security just by leadership in mouth, but also in action. They've got to do that as well. Then also there's training and awareness programs. So regular training, regular sessions to help bring your employees, your workforce up to speed are critical to ensuring success, because if your team knows what to look for, know those telltale signs, and they're actually able to ensure that everyone, either entry level all the way to C-suite levels, are informed and vigilant, and they can actually do that. And then finally, another thing is also it's important to actually encourage accountability, because security is a shared responsibility. It, enterprises should empower teams to actually understand what their role is in protecting the organization and encourage proactive behavior. I've heard someone tell me, well, I thought something was fishy, or maybe I didn't do something quite well, but I didn't say anything about it because I will be scapegoated. And that's a problem with many enterprises. So do you encourage a culture where your employees can say, hey, I think something doesn't seem right, or I might have done something wrong. We need to look at that. Does he get a query, or does he get fired because of that? Or do you actually encourage that? That's another thing that companies need to look at. So don't scapegoat people when incidents happen, because it has the unwanted effect of making people reluctant to disclose potential, probably serious compromises when they happen. So what possible solutions are we then available to us? What possible solutions can we look at? Because there are things that as an enterprise you can actually do to help you enhance your identity security posture. And if you do properly implement that, operative word, proper implementation, if you properly implement that across the organization, it does help. First, things like multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. It might seem pretty easy or pretty straightforward. Who doesn't have MFA? But lots of people don't have MFA. How many people have MFA on their CRA account? How many people know that you can actually have MFA in your CRA account? Okay. Banking accounts. How many of you have MFA in your banking account? How many of you have MFA on your social media? There you go. And how many of us are on our social media every day? But you don't have MFA on social media, so that's easy. We'll see a couple of things later on why it's so important, because MFA does ensure that even when a password is compromised, there's a second layer of verification required. It could be biometrics, it could be OTPs, it could be a hardware token, and that extra layer it dramatically reduces the risk of account takeovers and data breaches. So if a user is going to have an account with elevated privileges, you should be thinking about MFA, not just for the standard regular account, but also for that privileged account. And if you can, split those MFA. So don't use the same MFA platform to authenticate the regular account and the elevated account. So if you're using, say, a authenticator app for the standard account, try using a FIDO2 compliant token for the elevated account, or something different. So that way you can actually separate the risk that one compromise of one of them compromises all the access that user has for that user. We also have single sign-on, which does simplify the login process because it allows users to access multiple applications with just one set of credentials. Some say it's a problem. I don't think it is if it's properly implemented. Remember when I said proper implementation? Because one, it streamlines the user experience. I like to say that security and user experience are opposite ends of a sliding scale. So you ask yourself, how secure do I want to be, or do I want my users to have the best experience? So you want your security to help your users do the work as seamlessly as possible, but make it as difficult for whoever is a malicious actor trying to get in. So that's what you want to do. It helps the user actually get a better user experience if you're able to implement single sign-on. It reduces password fatigue, because how many of us do those things where they say, you have to change your password for this platform every time. So it's password 1, then password 2, then password 3, then 4. Then you get to 10, it becomes 11, or you add a $ at the end. That's what happened. And so once the MAs, once they figure out your pattern, then it's compromised. So it's difficult. So you actually want to encourage people to actually, okay, if I can do single sign-on, then I'm going to get a 27-character long password, with all the various variations, and then use that in there. It's harder, and that makes it easier. And of course, with privileged accounts, also manage that single sign-on experience securely. So session recordings, periodic authentication as well, setting session timeouts to ensure that you can actually limit, control potential damage, possibly use a PIM or a PAM so that you can actually also carry out things like automatic password rotation, session recordings, like I mentioned, because together with MFA and single sign-on, you can actually offer a perfect balance of strong security as well as a seamless user experience that enables organizations to actually protect their assets without adding unnecessary complexity or friction to everyday workflows. And that's quite important. I'm going to just sort of digress and say a bit here because someone has said, well, zero trust is and it's the antithesis of single sign-on, and it isn't quite. Zero trust does help a lot with this, but zero trust doesn't work against single sign-on. So single sign-on says, yes, you allow one person to sign on with one credential. Yes, zero trust says just because they've signed on with that credential doesn't mean, oh, he must be him. So he give him access to the keys of the kingdom. So you should be looking for, different signs of account behavior, signs of compromise. Where's he authenticating from? What are the device characteristics? Use the principle of least privilege. So every time he tries to have access to a different resource, query again. So don't just assume because he's provided you credentials at first, you then give that to him. So continuous challenge should be provided as well to help ensure that you are making sure that you're not implicitly trusting the user, because that's what zero trust actually is trying to do. Make sure there is no implicit trust. So, for example, we say bad zero trust with single sign-on is, say, because he's logged onto the VPN with his username and password, he has access to the entire corporate network. That's just stupid. So don't do that. So good SSO would be, he's got on the VPN. Okay, what does he need to do? He's trying to access a different server in a different domain. Challenge and be sure that you have the authentic challenge, the right response to give that access. I'll tell you a story once. Someone was telling me about. There was somebody who had a contract role for a company based in the US, and he was he would log in and do his work. It's quite all right. Now, he subcontracted that contract to someone in India. Now, there's nothing wrong with subcontracting. That's not the point. But he's always, based out of Portland, I think he was, and he was logging at a particular time. And then somebody called him once and said, hey, why were you logging into this system from a different IP address at 1 a.m. in the morning? And it was like, well, it was this person. And then that made him lose the contract. Because, hey, he could trust that person he's giving it to, but do you trust what endpoint the person is on? Do you trust what network the person is on? How do you know he has proper procedures to take care of his identity? How do you know that that person in India who by doing might know the job isn't going to be an entry point for MAs to actually get into your network? So all of that is very important. So that's what good SSO and zero trust does, because they didn't assume and say, hey, it's Chris logging in. Only it's from India, but because it's Chris, we let him go in. No. You actually want to verify also and say, should he be doing that? So a single source of truth for authentication, which is usually what identity tries to do, bring everything under one umbrella as a single source of truth, makes it easier to look for what we call indicators of compromise. And then it makes it easier for you to actually manage security, improve security, because let's face it, making your users memorize several passwords isn't improving your security. You just make them more frustrated, and then they try to bypass it. So they use birthday 1, birthday 2, birthday 3, and you know what we're talking about. Also, you could actually implement an identity and access management policy, because that would be the foundation of your organization's security strategy. So deploy an IGA if you don't have one. That's going to be the gatekeeper for all your critical data, your systems. And by verifying those identities, you're actually able to actually enforce access privileges for users, because the IAM is going to ensure that only authorized users are interacting with your sensitive information. So, for example, if you have a GPO that restricts interactive login for service accounts, and then you also got IP restriction active, then it's easy to have a policy that says, hey, if there's interactive login on this account, I want to detect that, especially if it's from an IP address that's not pre-approved on my ACL. So implement things like that, because that helps you with that. And also that does not only protecting you from both internal and external threats, but it also reduces your attack surface, because it limits the opportunities for breaches to actually happen, and then reducing your attack surface significantly. And then, of course, it does actually provide a strong framework for maintaining trust and regulatory compliance, and that helps you secure the future of your enterprise. So these are some of the things that we should be doing around identity and access management, making it essential for future protection. Of course, another interesting thing people have been talking about recently, which would also do well, is to use user identity behavior analytics, or UEBA, or UEBA, whatever you want to call it, whatever the acronym is, because that analyzes user and entity behavior, uses a bit of machine learning and data analytics to detect and flag unusual patterns that could be indicators of attacks. So, for example, you're able to identify potential threats, which you can then detect those anomalies when they show up, and you can respond to those suspicious activities, using machine learning and data. So you can see those patterns that indicate that there might be an attack or a compromise happening, monitoring that behavior. Because when you monitor that behavior, it's by monitoring you're able to establish a baseline. Because without that monitoring, you don't have a baseline. So where are you going to work it from? What's regular behavior or what's usual behavior? So you need to be able to establish that baseline by continuous monitoring to say, okay, this is regular, so this looks different. And of course, once you're able to detect those unusual activities, that lets you know, hey, is this a threat or is there a risk here? And then you can investigate further. But if you aren't even looking for it, you don't know it's happening. So it's important to make sure that you're actually looking for those in the first place. And of course, because you're then looking for it and you can see when it happens, it actually enhances the visibility and your ability to respond when those things happen, because you can see it happening and you can actually follow up if you have the tools in place to see it and if you have the resources to follow up. So that's a different conversation, but it's part of the things enterprises should be thinking about. And of course, that helps you support compliance and security and say, are we doing this? Compliance, yes, a checkbox, but also helps you support risk management as well. Are you reviewing all the risks you have? Are you able to actually put things in place to mitigate against those risks? It's by doing all of this that you're able to see all of that. It gives you a clearer picture of what it is that you're doing. Now let's talk about some best practices that can actually help enterprises secure remote workforces. Not every enterprise can implement everything, but if you're able to, it does help with that. So first, I know people have said, yes, VPNs are old school, but they still help. So use a VPN to encrypt connections because VPNs secure your data transmission, so preventing attackers from intercepting sensitive information, usually, if it's, again, operative word, properly implemented. Like we'll see later on, if there's improper implementation, you can still bypass that. And of course, make sure you've got regular device updates where you can apply security patches. So if you've got EDR or XDR in place as well, that can help towards all of that. Make sure that you're keeping all devices up to date where you can, patches, manage all of that, because it helps you keep see what your environment looks like, know if there's any vulnerabilities with your environment, and you're able to actually deal with those promptly. Again, if you're not looking for it, you don't see it. So that's important. So you have to be looking at that. And of course, like I said earlier, security is a shared responsibility. So it's not just the job of the cybersecurity team or the IR team or the guys in the SOC. Security is for everyone. So let your team, it's important to actually drop into the team that it's everyone's responsibility, either your C-suite all the way down to the new intern, because together everyone has a part to ensure that the enterprise stays secure. You only need one person to do something stupid, and then you have a breach. So encourage employees to speak up when they can. If they notice suspicious behavior that's either anomalous or they think they've made a mistake, like I said, don't demonize anyone. It's not okay to demonize anyone, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. There was a talk earlier about mental health. That's sort of talked a bit about that. So it is so important. And again, like I said, use secure remote access solutions. So you're deploying a zero trust network architecture, and you're using a SASE solution to ensure that users can only access what they need, and you're monitoring those access points as well. And then finally, you want to strengthen your endpoint security, like I said earlier, using the appropriate tools. So EDR, XDR, whatever vendor works for you, that's fine. But make sure you have that in place. I'm not going to tell you to use a particular vendor over the other. It's all totally up to your enterprise, what you choose to use. And of course, like I said earlier, enforce multi-factor authentication at all levels, across all boundaries where you can, because it does help. So adopting those best practices sort of help strengthen defenses when they happen. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, because not everyone in the department, in the company works for cybersecurity, you have to make sure that you're balancing security with the user experience. So ensure that robust security doesn't mean you're compromising productivity. So don't make it too difficult that your users are constantly trying to undermine your security, but make it such that they're able to actually work with you. So like I said earlier, single sign-on, allow them to do that without, remembering multiple passwords to reduce password fatigue. Minimize friction. So by optimizing your authentication, streamline your security as well. Use solutions that actually integrate seamlessly into your existing workflows. It's easier for people when they can, like look at the solution Kim showed us earlier. It's all within the same environment. It makes it easier to use than having to use this app, then go to that app, then that app, then come back here. No one wants to do that. So where you can integrate those workflows into those solutions into your workflows without causing significant disruptions. Of course, also you want to optimize authentication, so combine security and convenience that don't slow down the data. So for example, where you can use biometric authentication, it is quicker. I can just put my fingerprint on or my retina scan or whatever it is that works with you, or adaptive authentication, which I will talk a little bit about on later on, which is quite interesting. Some of the new things we're seeing there. And of course, you want to actually have a user-centric design. So think about your users when you're developing your solutions. What do your users want to see? How is this going to help your users do their work better? So, because security is there to enable the company and not make their life difficult. So that's what they want to do there. So as you're thinking about that. So having said all of this, like I said, it's hard to say that breach was a result of identity issues or that breach was a result of not implementing zero trust. But when we have the hindsight, we can actually look at some solutions, some cases in the past. And we know that if they had done things differently, it could have actually greatly mitigated the risk of a severe breach. So what we're going to do is look at a few examples of why we know that if you have the right culture, implement the right strategies, you can mitigate that. Examples such as the Equifax breach of 2017. So initially, it was actually hacked via a complaint web portal. So there was a vulnerability that was available on the system. It wasn't patched. It should have been patched, but it wasn't for some reason due to failures in the Equifax internal process. So attackers were able to actually move from that web portal to other servers because systems weren't segmented from each other, and they were able to use the same identities across those systems. And they were able to actually find usernames and passwords stored in plain text. And then once they found those systems on that web server, the web portal, they were able to actually cross into other systems and then, get into Equifax. So what happened? They pulled data out of the network in encrypted form, undetected for about 76 days, almost 3 months. Because Equifax, they had failed to renew a critical encryption certificate on one of their internal security tools. So then one day they woke up and like, oh, we haven't renewed this. So they renewed it. And when they did, they found out, wait, why is this user transferring 6 gig of data out? Because they hadn't been looking for that before. So it's important to make sure you're looking for things. And of course, Equifax didn't actually publicly publicize that breach until over a month after they discovered it. They paid, there was about 147 million affected customers, 143 in the US, about 4 million in Canada, and 600,000 in the UK. The US government has indicted 4 Chinese military individuals as a result of that, and they suspect it was actually the Chinese government that sponsored that because that data hasn't been found anywhere on the dark web. Maybe it's with China, we don't know. But, with hindsight, we know that if there had been a zero trust policy, there was microsegmentation, there was stronger MFA, it could have probably reduced the risk or prevented that breach from escalating to the level it got to. Another example we can actually think of is the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack of 2021. Because it happened in 2021, it was actually quite significant. It impacted fuel distribution on the eastern United States. The ransomware group called DarkSide, I believe, there was a weak password that they exploited to gain access to their IT systems, and then they deployed a ransomware, encrypting all their data. And as a result of that, Colonial actually, because they got encrypted, they actually had to then shut down their operations for a while. And that led to 4 shortages in the entire Western US. And 17 US states actually declared an emergency because of that, including Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. There was panic buying. There were so many crazy things that happened. And it affected critical infrastructure like hospitals and emergency services and aviation because they all depended on this pipeline to bring some of the things they needed. So just by that, it affected the entire Western United States, Eastern United States. What happened? Colonial Pipeline actually paid a $4.4 million ransom in Bitcoin to the group. The FBI was able to recover about 92% of that, but that was after Bitcoin had dropped in value. So it only came to about 2.3 million when they recovered that from the hackers. And of course, like I said, if there had been microsegmentation, if there had been zero trust, and they had good, strong identity policies, we probably have reduced the impact or scope of that breach when it happened. And of course, we remember last year those people who went to try to go to Vegas around this time last year, and they couldn't get in because MGM had an attack. There was also the hack that happened to MGM where it was an identity attack, but it was a more sophisticated method than just traditional phishing or credential stuffing. Because they breached MDM resource system, they used a social engineering tactic to actually gain access by impersonating one of the IT help desk on social media, impersonating them, and then call the help desk and says, I can't get my password. Can you reset my password and send it to this address? And they got the information in there. And of course, they were able to leverage that person's access to and elevated privileges, and they were able to actually use that to gain access inside the network. So once inside, deployed ransomware, encrypted systems, caused significant disruption, including disabling online reservation systems, room keys, slot machines, websites, the app, and all of that. And it's estimated that MGN lost about $100 million in revenue over the week or so that this happened. Of course, there was disruption in services that happened as well. And like I said, with hindsight, zero trust, strong MFA, microsegmentation, least privilege access could have actually prevented a reduction in the scope. Because the initial vector of attack was social engineering. That was the primary method used to gain initial access. So if there was strong authentication processes in place, that would have actually prevented the ransomware attack from actually escalating to the level which it did at the end. So that was also important as well. So if you're in MDM, strengthen your authentication processes, and that can help. So as technology is improving, the attackers have also evolved. Like I was saying to someone, it's not very often do you find attackers trying to brute force their way in. They're trying to find who is a legitimate user that I can steal his credentials and then use that. So what are the things we can actually do now? So because there's some emerging technologies, because identity security has to evolve to meet these new challenges that we're facing. So for example, we have biometrics. So enhanced verification with biometrics. And then there's also this thing called behavioral biometrics, where you actually can monitor certain attributes or behaviors of a user, such as mouse movements or typing patterns, as a layer of authentication. Now that's very interesting. That's next level NSA stuff. But it's going to trickle down eventually. So there are things to start to think about. Of course, also there is the risk of AI or AI in identity and access management as well, because AI is going to drive real-time decision making. So it's going to enable access control and all of that. So it's important that you're actually looking at all of that to really help you better manage your identity for your enterprise. Of course, automation as well can actually help you streamline the management of all of that, thereby reducing the manual intervention you need, and also help you speed up response times to threats, if that's automated. And then, of course, another new interesting part is there's blockchain for self-sovereign identity, where you can actually determine your identity and set that up. Individuals will actually own their own and control their own digital identities, so thereby reducing the reliance on the central authority. And of course, secure data sharing, where blockchain can actually provide tamper-proof secure methods for sharing identity credentials without exposing any sensitive information. And some of the challenges we also envisage to happen as technology starts to evolve and improve is that we're going to actually see a rise in deepfake identity fraud. So criminals may, like we heard from Kim and Amit earlier, use synthetic identities to impersonate or use those techniques to bypass traditional security methods. And that is a significant threat we have to think about. Evolving tactics also, the cyber criminals are beginning to use identity-based attacks. And so it's important that enterprises are beginning to improve their defenses to actually focus on how to deal with these sophisticated methods to compromise identities. So because they have to be right all the time, we have to be right all the time. They just have to be right once. So it's important that enterprises have to continually stay ahead, improve, and adapt to these new challenges. And of course, there are privacy concerns around innovating in identity security, but also trying to stay within the law around privacy. And that is going to be an ongoing challenge, no matter what happens. So the challenge companies have to think about constantly, and user expectations around data handling is going to also evolve there. So these trends and challenges are going to highlight the need for continuous innovation and vigilance in identity security to sort of continue to protect against current and future threats. So after all has been said and done, what are best practices and recommendations that we recommend? So for an enterprise to build a resilient cybersecurity posture, identity security has to be prioritized. a few key takeaways, for example. Develop a strong security culture, because security begins with a mindset. So if you can help your employees, your enterprise actually foster a security first culture across all levels. So not just your SOC team or your security team, but everyone, sales, marketing, HR, C-suite. It ensures that everyone knows that they have a role in protecting the organization. And leadership has to actually champion cybersecurity initiatives. Because if your leaders don't champion it and show that they're committed to cybersecurity and identity improvement, it's going to show to the workforce, and they're not going to do that as well. So leadership has to set clear expectations across the entire organization. And of course, to implement robust security solutions, IAM and IGA, SSO, MFA, and what have you, essential for protecting sensitive data and controlling access. Because a strong foundation in identity security actually significantly reduces the risks of breaches. And of course, start small. Don't think, well, we've got this enterprise, we're going to do everything all in one day. Rome wasn't built in a day. You don't go to secure enterprise in a day. That's a given. So start small. Maybe MFA. Start with MFA. Say, okay, for example, we're going to do MFA on our privilege accounts. Start there and then work outwards. MFA still remains one of the easiest, the most effective and simplest ways to secure access. So start by doing that. You don't need to go out and spend a ton of money or buy a ton of products to do that. Implement MFA, especially for your high-risk users. So C-suite, users who have access to elevated accounts, elevated privileges, or secure accounts, those who have the keys to your kingdom. Implement MFA for those, and then expand that into the entire organization. And of course, regularly update your IAM policies as well. So let the security evolve let your security evolve as the threat landscape evolves. Because if it doesn't, you might find that you're actually stuck in the past and you're fighting a battle you've already lost. So make sure that you're regularly updating that, review that to ensure that it aligns with current threats, current business needs, and let security evolve as that. And of course, like I said, continue to educate your employees, because your employees are your first line of defense. So ongoing training ensures that they are aware of phishing, social engineering, and other identity-based threats. And then tailor that training to different levels of experience to ensure that you get the maximum level of effectiveness. So by focusing on those practices, you can actually enhance your security posture, create a proactive security culture, and safeguard identities in this changing landscape that we have. If you want to do some further reading, there's some material you can actually read out here. So there's the NIST 800-207, which talks about zero trust. There's also a Forrester report on zero trust as well. And there's something by Palo Alto, not a plug, about microsegmentation, and then talking about SOAR and SIEM and SASE and zero trust, how they all come together. And there's also a case study about implementing zero trust in an organization, if you want to see that. And then there's some information about the various breaches I talked about, Equifax, Colonial Pipeline, and MGM. And with that, I'm available on LinkedIn. So someone says I make a lot of noise on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn. So if you want, you can connect with me. I also happen to run a cybersecurity focused podcast that has a very interesting, funny name. It's the CyberSec Migrant. I'm a migrant. I work in cybersecurity. So very, very interesting, very boring name for the podcast. So you can actually look at that. And at this point, I will take any questions if there are any. Yes, please.
Mentioned about ZTNA.
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, you mentioned about ZTNA. ZTNA has to do more on the authorization than authentication, because it's a device level authentication which works through PDP. And if that is done well, then even in that scenario also, it depends on the organization how effective are the controls deployed to make sure ZTNA is effective. So that I think so that's a key thing for organizations to see that the maturity before even going for ZTNA and any other technologies. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I said, I think the future is zero trust. Is every organization at that mature level to implement that? I don't think so. But like you said, yes, it starts with the authentication, but then you can actually build on that ZTNA to determine your authorization and level of access that you give to them. But again, keyword being proper implementation, because if you implement it poorly, then it's pointless, right? So it's important. So let every enterprise think about, okay, what's most important to us as an enterprise? And then start from there. So like I said, I'm not going to say go buy this solution or that solution. Look at your enterprise and determine what works best for you. What do we need to secure the most? Who has access to that? Where are they accessing it from? What do we do? Okay, what policies do we need to put in place to ensure that these keys to the kingdom, these crown jewels we have, are well protected? And then work from there.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is regarding MFA fatigue, and I'm curious, what are your thoughts? And can zero trust assist in MFA fatigue situation? Yep.
MFA fatigue, yes, that can be a challenge, but I think with proper education, you can let your enterprise and your employees know why it's important. I think the problem is sometimes people don't understand fully why there's so much, like for example, I have to log into my standard account. I have to use a different MFA factor to verify, and then I'm going to my privilege account, a different one. Why are we doing that? So if there's a lot of understanding on why we're doing that and the importance of that, I think it helps to reduce the severity of that. So education is critical in that regard. I'm not going to recommend or say, hey, there are things you can do to make MFA easy. I think just by having MFA, think of it like this. Someone is trying to go into a parking lot, to parkade to steal cars. There's 5 nice Lexuses, because I love Lexus, parked in the garage, in the parkade. 4 of them have a steering lock and a wheel lock. The 5th one doesn't. Which one do you think the attacker is going to steal or try to steal first? The one without the lock, because it's just easier, because he can just smash the glass, connect the wires, and drive off. With the other ones, he has to smash the glass, get a cotton tool, cut the locks, remove the locks, throw them out, then get the wires, join them. It's just too much work. So MFA just, yes, let your employees know why are they doing that, and then it just sort of deters the attackers, because it's not about if you're going to get people when, but make it harder for them to actually get to that point eventually. That's what I think.
I wasn't going to ask my question until he asked the question about MFA fatigue. And so really it's more of a comment than a question. I loved your presentation, by the way, and I've been doing security for the majority of my career. And so when we start talking about zero trust, we're really talking about authorization and authentication of every transaction that occurs. And one of the things that I think these presentations miss is the use of certificates and use of machine level certificates and user level certificates on machines. So how we resolve MFA fatigue and is to be able to authenticate the machine itself, right? And so therefore then, even if the user clicks the MFA and sends the token to the attacker, they can't validate the machine, so therefore then the attacker can't get into the environment. So if anything, I would suggest that you put certificates and certificate management and certificate lifecycle management into your presentation, because it will then bolster up the conversation of zero trust.
That's true. I didn't want it to be too technical about zero trust and all of that. That's why I didn't see a lot about that. But totally right. That does help. Yes, if you can reduce the amount of human interaction you need to do to verify those transactions, it makes it easier for you to actually manage all of that, which is what certificate authentication does for you. Yes. I saw another hand somewhere here, I think. Okay.
In your experience, what's the best security awareness training program that you've come across? What we do, we onboard our clients, we give them an hour presentation of different kinds of things that can go wrong, user-based, and then we have the monthly phishing campaigns, which everybody's really tired of, but you need it. What in your experience, is the best way to train the users that's actually useful?
That's a very interesting question, because I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I've also not been paid by any company to tell you this is what to do. So I'm reluctant to mention any specific names. We work with a very popular Canadian company. It starts with a B, so you might know the company. And and they have ongoing training. I think the key is continuous ongoing training. Security training can be a once and done. So you have to let it design what works best. So you determine what works best for our enterprise. Oh, our users respond well to this. How can we design ongoing training around this that makes it easier for them to actually understand the challenges we face? So I think that's the important thing. I've been told to stop because I think we need to get ready for the next. But I'm still around today and tomorrow. So if anybody wants to stop and chat, please feel free to stop me. And thank you for listening to my thoughts this afternoon.
All right, a big thank you again to Femi. Thank you so much. In 10 minutes, there's going to be another talk in this room regarding the Internet of Things in a decentralized world and how security relates to that.